The stove burns fiercely, and the steam drives the gears to rotate and bite. Riding on a metal giant ship bound with rivets, humans shuttle back and forth between the stars. The great emperor shines brightly and receives his shade. The benevolent empire has found a place to survive in the vast sea of stars. And Dussander believes that there may be other possibilities in this world where the art style is not right. This is a story that ignites countless sparks in a Victorian Western style world. Keywords of the novel. Wankiank Singwo no pop-ups, Wankiank Singwo TXT complete collection download, Wankiank Singwo latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Family Teachers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Family Teachers. In the dark alley, a small yellow wildflower emerged from the cracks in the bricks. It strives to grow upwards, trying to catch a beam of sunlight leaking from the towering tower with its gray-green leaves. Its leaves are already very close to the sunlight, and it seems that in a while, the leaves stained with dust and mud will be able to bathe in the gentle sunlight. A leather boot mixed with water and coal ash in the corner was suddenly stepped on, and the small flowers in the brick cracks were crushed and turned into mud. Tisk. The owner of the leather boots rudely spat saliva mixed with tobacco on the ground. He lifted his foot and ran it over and over again. The master's intention was not to take the woman's life either. I don't know when a person leaned against the wall at the entrance of the alley. He was wearing a rainproof cloak, a high hat on his head, and a large string of various wrenches and keys pinned to his waist. Our task is to scare her away and get her out of Olin. Don't do anything extra. That woman killed my best hunting dog, the owner of the leather boots angrily cursed. I want to skin her alive. Don't do anything unnecessary. The man leaning against the wall repeated his previous words with emphasis, then spread his hand and said, Go find another idle little rascal on the street in the dock area. Isn't that how your hunting dogs all come? The owner of the leather boots suddenly stopped moving and turned his head to look at the person by the wall, saying, No, I must skin that woman. I can stop, but for this transaction, I need to add 10 gold pounds. The man leaning against the wall neither agreed nor immediately refused. He just asked, Are you sure you want to break the rules for a dead hunting dog? Don't scare me with the rules. The owner of the leather boots spat on the ground again. Give me the money, the rest is my personal matter. That hunting dog is the most convenient for me to use, and it's not impossible for me to let go. I have to pay more. Bang. With the sound of opening a bottle of high-end sparkling wine that seemed to be of good vintage, the petals were all crushed and mixed into the mud. Suddenly, a damaged face with a frozen expression of surprise and terror appeared next to it. The dark red blood was mixed with white clots, quickly spreading through half of the alley. Don't blame me, you broke the rules first. At first, the figure leaning against the wall stood up straight. He withdrew the high-pressure steam pistol from his hand and waved his hand. The wrench and key on the waist collided with each other, making a crisp sound. He used his hands to dispel the white water vapor floating in front of him, and showed a somewhat embarrassed expression towards the boots soaked in blood and mud. The little girl in the building has already been booked. She needs to go to a place that the mining consortium cannot reach, and then complete that invention completely. The self-talk abruptly came to an end, and he suddenly looked up and showed a very bright smile towards the upstairs window. Paulina knelt on the floor trembling all over, throwing the wrench and bolt in her hand onto the ground. Backed against the wall below the window, Paulina tried her best to tuck herself into the dead corner below the window. She felt a bit breathless, and her heart was pounding with pain. She just witnessed a murder happening in the back alley through the window of her studio. What frightened her even more was the smile that the killer showed to her. She was very convinced that the killer's gaze matched hers. Paulina took several deep breaths, and as she was hesitating whether she should immediately go to the nearby safety cabinet to pick up her weapon, a sound of footsteps and a long string of metal wrenches and keys swinging and colliding around her waist suddenly rang out the door. The sound of footsteps and movement grew louder and louder from far to near. These sounds finally stopped outside the door. "I know you're inside, Miss Paulina." The man's voice crawled through the crack in the door, as if a cold wind was blowing in. Paulina trembled even more fiercely. "3 days ago, you were attacked in the dock area. After some fighting, you took the perpetrator's weapon and stabbed him in the back. The man outside the door said slowly, after you escaped, the young man who was only 16 years old died." Paulina's trembling all over suddenly stopped, her eyes widened, and her whole body froze. "Of course, you don't need to worry about what this will bring. Trouble. I've already dealt with all your problems in the back alley just now," the man continued. "My master asked me to convey his greetings to you. He suggested that you bring your invention and leave Olin immediately. Never come back again." The male voice outside fell silent, and just as Paulina felt that the other person had probably left, the sound of metal collision rang out again. Suddenly, a craft paper envelope reached under the door crack. "This can be considered my personal gift," the man's voice rang out again. "This is a ticket to Newsall, which will depart tomorrow night. With your abilities, finding a governess job in Newsall is not a problem. It would be nice to live like this for a lifetime. Anyway, please don't go back to Olin." After a long time, it wasn't until Paulina gradually felt pain in her joints that she crawled to the door and picked up the brown paper envelope. There is a shipping ticket in the envelope, as well as a news cut from the newspaper about recruiting a private tutor. Baroness Androni is hiring a private tutor, hoping that the tutor will have sufficient experience and solid knowledge, suitable for educating the 10-year-old boy on the basic principles of mechanics and other related knowledge. Human beings have mastered the second driving force besides animal power, which is the fundamental reason why the world can become what it is today. The warm sunlight shines on the room, and the old man with white hair and combed back into his back is wearing a somewhat old-fashioned tailcoat. I don't know if it's because of his personality, but the old man's tone is smooth and without any waves, with a unique mechanical flavor. The great emperor shines brightly and receives his shade. The benevolent empire has found a place to survive in the vast sea of stars. The old man's voice continued to be calm and without any waves, but in this sentence, a little boy's voice suddenly came in. The voices of the elderly and the young began to overlap at the great emperor and ended together at the land of survival. The old man's voice remained calm, but the little boy's voice was full of boredom. "Mr. Ronnie, I have already remembered this sentence. For the sake of teaching efficiency. Could you please not add such a sentence after each sentence?" The little boy with brown hair, dressed in gorgeous attire, lay bored on the desk and said, "Aren't you here to teach me the principles of mechanical design? Why do you need to learn history before teaching the principles of mechanical design? Before studying mechanical design, you need to first study history to clarify your learning objectives, study mathematics to lay the foundation of mechanical design, and study the laws formulated by the Imperial House of Lords to ensure that you comply with relevant regulations in the process of mechanical design. These are all mandatory course contents for you." The old man's tone remains unchanged. "Sir, you should not discuss content unrelated to the course during class, please be careful. Let's talk about the content related to teaching." The little boy with brown hair rolled his eyes and sat up from his seat. What mineral caused interstellar jumping ability, and how was it discovered? How did His Majesty's ancestors obtain political power at the beginning of the empire's establishment? How did the empire maintain its 400-year-long glory through what means? How did the legitimacy of this political power come about? Was imperial power entrusted to divine power, or did divine power require imperial permission? Mr. Ronnie's white hair above his head trembled with a mechanical odor that did not belong to his original self. "Ah, this question shouldn't have been brought up, should it?" The little boy keenly sensed his teacher's unease and changed the topic, asking, "Why not talk about something else? Your salary is £1 of gold per week, and the 6 private tutors you worked for before all earned between 15 and 18 shillings. Has the fee for private tutoring always been so high? How do other families who are not aristocratic or have such high incomes educate their children? Will the empire establish educational institutions or teach them literacy? Or will the church make them illiterate and go to mines or factories, where they work day and night at a rate of 1/10 of an adult's salary, until they reach adulthood? Dismissal or let them get injured or even die due to work. Can it be said that the great emperor and the benevolent empire do not care about the lives of these children at all, nor do they intend to let the common people acquire knowledge? And where is the greatness of the emperor and the mercy of the empire reflected? After a lot of words, the little boy realized that he had made a slip of his tongue and let out an "ah." Sorry, I seem to have asked another question that shouldn't have been raised. The little boy apologized sincerely and then turned his head to look at his teacher. Well. Now there are only the 2 of us in this room. Can you please answer these questions for me, teacher? The vibration, which did not belong to the mechanical taste, reached its peak, and Mr. Ronnie quickly closed the book in front of him. I packed all my luggage as quickly as possible, then opened the door and walked out. When he left the room, he left a resounding sentence. Farewell. Mr. Ronnie has submitted his resignation letter and believes that Mr. Dussander's personality is too unconventional and may be more suitable for political development than machinery. At Baroness Androni's estate in New Zoll, the butler reported the situation to the hostess. Olin has sent a letter from her side stating that Polytechnic is interested in the position of governess. However, she hopes to have an invention demonstration at the ball before joining. I thought she had already declined this invitation. Baroness Androni frowned. She suddenly agreed. Although there was no clear explanation, in the letter, Signor Paulina vaguely mentioned that she was in some trouble. The butler calmly replied, I think Signor Paulina may need some shelter. Baroness Androni gently rubbed her forehead and said, if it's just for protection, there's no problem. I hope she can get along with Dussander. What kind of invention is it? Polytechnic Paulina did not explain. She described it as the most important invention of this era. The butler replied, I believe with Polytechnic Paulina's knowledge, this invention is not a foolish scam like a perpetual motion machine. The stupider her invention, the better. Baroness Androni chuckled lightly and said, it would be best if it were so foolish that even the nobles could see that it was not worth even a penny's investment. That way, I could find a family tutor for my dear little Dussander who wouldn't resign. And there is also more room for negotiation in terms of salary, the butler agreed. I think a weekly salary of £1 of gold per week may be too high. If her invention cannot receive investment from other nobles, 12 shillings per week may be more appropriate. If she could allow my little Dussander to sit down safely and receive education in mechanical principles, it wouldn't hurt to pay 2 gold pounds a week. Baroness Androni's helplessness overflowed. He's a good kid, just. He loves challenging teachers too much. The butler also looked a bit helpless. After careful consideration, he suggested, I suggest not mentioning the tutor to Mr. Dussander for now, but you can tell him about the content of the invention display. 10-year-old boys all have a strong curiosity, and perhaps through the invention display, he can also develop curiosity about Ms. Paulina. Before Ms. Paulina officially becomes his governess, let her read in her room by herself. Baroness Androni sighed, I hope the punishment of staying in the room for a full day will make her realize that she needs to control her words and actions. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Steam Horse and Ball. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Steam Horse and Ball. The brown-haired boy lay on the table, writing his diary with a pen dipped in water. His hand occasionally stiffened, and then he put down the pen dipped in water and scratched his head with the ink-stained pen. How is the word teach written? Since crossing over to this world 10 years ago, Dussander has had very few opportunities to write his mother tongue. Not writing Chinese characters for a long time, and without a mobile phone or dictionary for reference, forgetting to write with a pen has become a common occurrence. The content of the study 2 days ago was history. Leaving aside the rationality and significance of teaching history to 10-year-old children, and regardless of the connection between history and mechanics. But I was once again shocked. The young man paused and dipped his pen in ink again, writing, "I really can't figure out how a Western steampunk-style world can tilt the technology tree to this shape. Whose steampunk world can have space-jumping ability to start interstellar travel?" He put down his pen, sighed, and looked out the window at the towering spire tower and the chimney sprayed with cigarette ash, muttering to himself. The art style of this world. It's not right. Due to a lack of artistic style, Dussander lost the motivation to continue writing his diary. He sat on a leather-wrapped chair for a moment and then closed the diary with a complex gear and screw locking structure. Pulling down the leather-wrapped brass lever in the upper right corner of the table, layers of gears interlocked and rotated, and the steel locking structure firmly locked the contents of the desk. If it weren't for this safe and useful confidential writing desk, he wouldn't dare to write Chinese characters randomly. If these characters were to spread, he might be caught by some old men wearing white robes as pagans, tied to wooden pillars, and burned alive. After the table was locked, Dussander suddenly slapped his head. There is still an important content that has not been included. It is said that today a talented female inventor will come to visit and showcase the most important invention of this era to her mother. As a college student who only traveled here in his junior year, Dussander is very interested in this kind of invention. Dussander. You should go change your clothes now. Just as Dussander hesitated whether to reopen his desk and redo his diary, his mother's gentle voice came in from outside the door. "Miss Lorraine has been waiting for you downstairs for a long time. Making a lady wait is not a gentleman's behavior." Dussander, who is now named Dussander, blinked his eyes and complained in his heart. Asking his 10-year-old son to soak a 12-year-old girl is not something that a baroness should do, is it? "Good day, Lord Dussander." After changing into a white shirt and a vest sewn with gemstone blue and gold thread, and putting on a black velvet coat on the outer layer, Dussander met Lorraine in the living room on the first floor and then froze. Wearing a finely crafted blue crinoline ball gown, the figure swayed slightly. 12-year-old Lorraine stood up and nodded lightly towards Dussander. Her golden hair was coiled into a bun behind her head, and her long and beautifully shaped snow-white neck was covered by a layer of white lace scarf. From outside the living room window, the sunlight scattered into the room fell on her hair, as if gilding her with a layer of gold, making her look particularly dazzling. "Good day, Miss Lorraine." Dussander coughed lightly to cover up the embarrassment she had just been shocked by. Such a beautiful little girl may have become a big star on Earth in her previous life, right? Lorraine sat back on the sofa and said in a soft tone, "I'm looking forward to today's dance." "Lord Dussander, can you be my dance partner for today?" Dussander didn't answer the question directly. He glanced at the maid standing at the door and then shook the bell placed beside him. "Please make a cup of tea for Miss Lorraine." Using a simple and reasonable excuse, she temporarily dismissed the maid. Subsequently, Dussander tiptoed to the door and completely closed the thick oak door. Then he fell directly into the sofa. "Your parents didn't come." Dussander simply curled his leg up on the armrest of the sofa. The tight pants that were too tight really made him uncomfortable. "They finally gave up on the absurd plan of marrying you to me." "You overthink." Rolling still maintained her perfect lady-sitting posture and smiling expression, but the words she spat out of her lipstick mouth had nothing to do with her appearance. "They are now under the glass corridor of the dance hall and actively spreading rumors that the two of us are about to get engaged." Dussander rolled his eyes and said, "You know they're spreading rumors, so you're planning to let them continue this nonsense. You're only 12 years old. It's too early to talk about getting engaged now, isn't it? The Imperial Code stipulates that men can get married at the age of 12 with the permission of their guardians, while women can get married at the age of 14. 2 years later, you and I will meet the age requirements," Lorraine chuckled lightly. "I don't think Mrs. Androni is very resistant to this proposal either." Dussander's white eyes rolled even more fiercely, and he knew what his gentle and considerate mother was thinking. Although Lorraine is beautiful, she is 12 years old. Even if she is 14 years old in 2 years, is it still too early to get married? Married to a beautiful girl who was only 14 years old, Dussander had no doubt that he would appear at a firing range on Earth after his death and be shot continuously with a righteous 12.7 caliber heavy machine gun for half an hour. Even when he got married, he was only 12 years old. After all, adding in his inner age, Dussander was already 30.4 years old. He sighed and asked, "Let's not mention their foolishness for now. Will you be willing to marry me in 2 years?" Lorraine fell into silence for a moment. After nearly a quarter of an hour, about 7.5 minutes, with a somewhat confused smile, she lifted her head and slowly said, "If it weren't for you, they would definitely have sent me to a nobleman's house in Olin and asked me to be a lover for a nobleman in his 50s. Compared to that situation, I would rather marry you." After discussing this chilling possibility, Lorraine smiled at Dussander and said, "But I believe you will never let me end up like that, will you?" The fastest way to reach Baroness Androni's estate from the Upper Alban Interstellar Landing Site in New Zoll is by steam carriage. Take Duke Sar Avenue, turn east at the largest and most magnificent Sunset Square in Alban, and then walk along the cobblestone-lined avenue for 4/4 of an hour. On Albans Avenue, there is a steam horse shining with a dazzling brass light all over its body, slowly moving forward on the cobblestone-covered road. The harness wraps around its body and connects to a pure white carriage in the rear, adorned with golden iris patterns. The wind swept unidentifiable coal ash and rolled across the road with withered leaves. Subsequently, he was crushed by a horse hoof that was also shining with a metallic color. It sprays strong steam from its nostrils. The steam is also mixed with a large amount of coal ash, as well as occasional sparks that are still burning. The 4 hooves of the horse strode forward with great effort, and the shining horse was covered in small cracks. Through the gap, one can vaguely see gears biting and rotating together. "Mr. Coachman, we need to go faster." A woman in the carriage shouted at the top of her voice, "The ball is about to start, we must hurry to the estate." The driver sitting in the driver's seat was smoking a pipe and turned to look at the woman shouting. He nodded and then pulled the lever next to the seat, which also shone with brass color. The pull rod, which had almost turned white due to friction, was forcefully pulled down, and the copper horse with a strong appearance suddenly accelerated the speed of the horse's hooves stepping down. The steam originally sprayed out one by one from the nostrils almost formed a straight line after the steam horse ran. The speed of the horse's hooves getting faster and faster, and some small coal blocks that were about to burn out fell out of the square opening under the horse's belly, rolling directly onto the cobblestone road surface. A small portion of them were lucky enough to avoid being crushed by the 4 wheels of the carriage, and then were directly held in the palm of their hands by a pair of dirty, cracked, dusty, and snotty little hands. In the eyes of these poor children who are still wearing shorts and old leather shoes that don't fit well in late autumn, these burning red small coal blocks are treasures. Even if the coal ash on their hands cannot completely block the heat, they will never let go of these bright red little elves. These almost burnt coal blocks can be sold at a high price of at least 7 pence per pound in the fuel shop on the street corner. This year's Nuzzer seems to have a particularly tough winter. Of course, hardship only applies to scattered farmers and ordinary people in cities. A pound of 35 pence worth of thermal coal is not something they can afford. If they need to keep warm, they can only buy depleted coal that has already been burned. Only middle-class people with stable and decent jobs can overcome economic pressure and buy enough thermal coal for a whole week at once when they receive their weekly salary. As a cost, the club that could have been visited 4 times a week had to be reduced to 2 times a week. People who engage in social activities at clubs are mostly commoners without noble titles. Those nobles with titles and even their own fiefs and estates never disdain to enter clubs. Their social interactions mainly take place within their own or other aristocratic estates. Today, it seems that the nobles of the entire Nizhao region have gathered in Baroness Androni's estate. The steam carriage almost filled the entire square of the estate, mixed with several aristocratic carriages pulled by real horses. Even further away, there are 2 steam airships tied to the mooring poles of the airship. Above the airship, there are 2 beige floating airbags that are 120 meters long and 40 meters high. The soft airbag is adorned with metal patterns on the outside. These decorations also ensure that the airbag can firmly connect to the ship's connection device. 6 huge brass propellers driven by 3 steam engines can propel this big guy to fly at a speed of 12 miles per hour while carrying 30.5 people. This type of transportation is not very fast, but it is extremely popular among nobles because it can cut corners and travel straight in the air, and avoid bumps and sewage odors from entering the cabin, thereby affecting passenger interest. It is a luxury that only true nobles can enjoy. On the south side of the steam airship mooring pole, the glass corridor of the dance hall was crowded with people. The most important invention of this era. The nobles, dressed in luxurious fur jackets, engaged in social activities before entering the manor dance hall, filled with puzzled discussions. If there really is such an important invention, why choose to stay at Mrs. Androni's estate? This probably indicates that the inventor was a scammer, said a jazz figure with 2 mustaches and gear zoom glasses on his right eye. If it were really what the inventor called the most important invention of this era, any wise person would first choose to showcase it in the Duke's ballroom. The nobles around emitted understanding and agreement laughter. Of course, no one would think that Baroness Androni was not wise enough because of this. Using the opportunity of invention display to prepare a ball, which was already a common social method among nobles. The dance hall built by Baroness Androni is the most suitable place for winter use in the entire Nizhao region. During the renovation last year, Baroness Androni's husband ordered engineers to build a combustion chamber specifically for heating on the west side of the dance hall, about 400 joules, about 500 meters, away. And connect the boiler in the dance hall and combustion chamber together with iron pipes wrapped in cork. As long as the fire starts the night before the ball starts, the hot water will conduct heat in the underground iron pipes. The next morning, the dance hall can reach a suitable temperature for dancing. As long as they can attend the ball here, the nobles will not actually care whether the invention that is about to be presented to everyone will be a hilarious and crude scam. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Epoch-making inventions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Epoch-making inventions. Accompanied by her fiancé A.E. Dussander, Lorraine and her parents smoothly met on the glass corridor outside the dance hall. Dussander, who was responsible for accompanying her, received a series of performative greetings from the expectant mother. Law in the corridor. The performance lasted for a full 2/4 of an hour with the most appropriate response and a smile, and Dussander was able to escape with a thin layer of sweat behind his back. After bidding farewell to the Lorraine family, Dussander awkwardly walked through the crowd and finally entered the dance hall. He can't wait to see this invention first. Is this the most important invention of this era? With the only son of Baroness Androni and the innate curiosity of a 10-year-old child, Dussander successfully obtained a license to come and see the invention in the lounge of the dance hall. In the center of the lounge, a striking iron table appeared that differed significantly from the magnificent environmental style. There is a strange-shaped metal artifact on the desktop. The upper part of this piece of metal is cylindrical, with 4 brass pipes embedded on both sides of the cylinder. The lower middle part of the metal is enclosed by a square iron box. On the outside of the box, there is a metal wheel that is about the size of a steam carriage wheel. The inventor of this strange creation stood beside the table, ready to answer the questions of the visitors. Yes, Mr. Lord. Although named Dussander, who is only 10 years old now, his title still needs to follow the provisions of the imperial code. Only nobles with the title of baron or above can call him dear little Dussander, or other more affectionate, terms that fit the identity of a 10-year-old boy. As the inventor of this machine and one of the few women in the entire empire who had received higher education in mechanical design, Paulina, who had no aristocratic status, still needed to call the little boy with brown hair in front of her "Lord" and lift her skirt, bow down and bow. However, these small things are not important to Paulina. In fact, even the fact that she was forced to leave her studio in Olin forever and come to News all alone is not so important. She has always been eager for her invention to receive funding from at least one or two nobles. Regardless of whether the other party sees the potential of this invention or is interested in something else about themselves, only with funding can she continue to improve her invention. Paulina firmly believed that her invention was enough to change the world, and even to be permanently recorded in history, just like Wald's invention and improvement of the steam engine. I hope this young Viscount can be aware of his ignorance correctly, instead of wantonly slandering his invention like Olin's great technicians. She sighed in her heart, thinking that if this young lord were any older, perhaps she could use some other methods to gain the other person's favor. Entering the field of mechanical design, which is exclusive to men, due to not accepting defeat, but ultimately relying on one's body to gain recognition. This approach is completely shameful in Paulina's eyes. But in order to obtain funding, she had no room for her own consideration. Paulina's psychological activity is very exciting, and Dussander's expression is also very exciting. It looks like some kind of power device. Dussander looked around this device, with his back in his hand, carefully observing it for half a day, then suppressed his shock and raised his question with a natural curious expression. These brass pipes should be providing fuel, right? There are some oxidation marks on the outside of the pipes. Are you using some kind of fuel with a relatively high temperature? Paulina's originally gentle expression suddenly stiffened, and she slowly widened her eyes. You sealed the main moving parts with a black metal plate with hinges, which must be to open them later. When other gentlemen sneered and pointed out that, this is just a small steam engine, in order to gain a lot of admiration. This idea is good and very dramatic. Dussander continued his analysis, his lips slightly raised, as if he had seen the upcoming stage of pretending to be aggressive. He continued, in fact, the movement of this power device does not require heating water to produce steam. The fuel input from the pipeline will rapidly expand inside the machine through combustion, which is the core driving force behind its operation. Paulina's expression became even more stiff, like a robot that had not been lubricated before. She slowly turned her head to look at Dussander, her lipstick lips opened and closed several times, but couldn't say a word. Dussander now has no time to appreciate the other person's surprise. He was indeed shocked by the product that suddenly appeared in front of him. According to the history that Dussander was studying before, the human technology tree in this world is completely different from the world in his previous life. An inventor named Wald invented and directly improved the steam engine. Subsequently, under the influence of this new power source, humanity quickly began the first industrial revolution. In the proper terminology of the world, this was called the Great Revolution. However, before the first industrial revolution had caused sufficient socio-economic changes, a second great discovery emerged. Humans discovered minerals that could allow objects to directly jump in space. What exactly is this mineral, how is space jumping achieved, and how do people ensure that the direction and distance during space jumping are correct? These problems torment Dussander and make him unable to sleep at night. But he has not yet learned the relevant knowledge. Noble families adopt a home tutoring education model for their children. All knowledge is disseminated through the oral narration and blackboard writing of the tutor. He cannot even satisfy his curiosity by reading the textbook in advance. In short, after discovering this mineral, humans completed their first successful manned space jump within 20 years and quickly discovered dozens of planets suitable for human habitation and survival thereafter. The rapid expansion of human living space has become the best weapon to ease social conflicts. Under mild economic and social conditions, the demand for technological progress driven by production relations is no longer sharp, as there is plenty of space and resources. The steam engine not only failed to be rapidly replaced by the demand for miniaturization and quieter and more efficient, but also continued to develop with extremely vigorous vitality for nearly 300 years. Most of the skilled technicians with sufficient professional knowledge have been hired by companies or nobles of various colonial stars with high salaries as applied talents, and human improvements to steam engines are also in a state of minor repairs. Nowadays, steam engines have been on the path of miniaturization for a long time, but progress has been extremely slow. The basic concept of an external combustion engine has never been challenged. The internal combustion engine, which was supposed to have appeared about 100 years after the improvement of the steam engine, was delayed by 2 centuries. Now, it appears in front of Dussander. So, what fuel is this machine using? Dussander restrained his divergent thinking and refocused on the amazing machine in front of him. The efficiency of internal combustion engines is naturally higher than that of external combustion engines, and it is more conducive to miniaturization compared to steam engines. At the same time, the noise is smaller and the vibration during operation is much smaller than that of a steam engine. But the problem is, internal combustion engines don't have such a good appetite as steam engines. Almost all fuels can be used as a source of heat for steam engines, but internal combustion engines can only use a few specific fuels. Although humans have already discovered oil, this fossil fuel has only been found on 6 colonial planets. At the same time, there are significant differences in the petroleum substances produced by different colonial stars. At least in Nuzul, the oil discovered is extremely viscous, almost like asphalt. This type of fuel is clearly not an ideal source of heat for internal combustion engines. We use gas. Paulina's nervousness noticeably improved as she talked about her professional knowledge. She whispered, "It's a toxic byproduct produced during coal mining." Although I don't know why Lord Dussander, who is only 10 years old, can recognize internal combustion engines at a glance, let alone why he appears to be very familiar with this type of machine. But she still explained, the price of coal under the control of the mining consortium is really too expensive. If they can use the gas they don't need as fuel, the development prospects of this power equipment will be very good. Dussander shook his head and said with a regretful expression, "This machine has great potential. But unfortunately, you are currently in Nuzul." Paulina didn't quite understand what Dussander meant, and she persisted in defending her invention. "I have great confidence in my invention, and its potential is infinite," she said. "It's not wrong to have endless potential, but if you want to get all the gentlemen's ideas at this ball, then you're probably going to be disappointed." Dussander frowned. "After arriving at Nuzul, your machine has never been experimentally operated, has it?" "Because there was no need, the time was too short, and I didn't bring much gas." Paulina's voice sounded a bit guilty, and she quickly added, "When I was at Olin, I had already tried many times, and its operation was very perfect." "In Olin? That's no wonder." Dussander showed a smile that perfectly matched the image of a 10-year-old boy. "I can assure you that in Nuzul, this machine will not be able to continue to operate at all. Your invention will become the laughing stock of all nobles. Its failed display will cause great damage to your reputation, and from then on, the entire empire will recognize you." He paused for a moment, then saw the nameplate engraved on the machine by Paulina, and added, "Ms. Paulina is a complete fraud and paranoid. No matter how noble the identity of the young lord in front of him may be, the device he has invested countless enthusiasm and energy in inventing has been demoted to such a degree that no inventor can accept it." Paulina's lips turned white, and she was almost about to open her mouth and shoot the child who didn't understand anything but spoke wildly out. "But I can help you improve it," Dussander said with a smile. "Its future prospects are very bright, but first of all, you need to know why this artwork cannot function properly in Nuzul." Before the other party questioned him, Dussander first revealed a small part of the answer. "This is Nuzul, a plateau planet with an average equivalent altitude of 2,400 joules. And Olin's average equivalent altitude is only 27 joules. Such machines can still operate normally in Olin, but this is Nuzul. Your work may not even be able to sustain a successful cycle. He spread out his hand and said, when you arrived at Nuzol, didn't you feel that breathing was a bit difficult? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Dussander's Bad Thoughts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Dussander's Bad Thoughts. Although Dussander repeatedly emphasized that Paulina's gas internal combustion engine had fatal defects, Paulina still had no intention of giving up the display. She can't afford to pay for a boat ticket from Nuzol to another place. This is her first stop to fight for funding for her invention. If she doesn't receive enough funding, this may also be her last stop. Paulina, who cut off ties with her family for the sake of studying, Paulina, who graduated from Imperial University with first place in her grade, Paulina, who resigned from Imperial Machinery Company for her own invention, and Paulina, who spent 3 years and exhausted all her savings to develop a gas internal combustion engine, are not people who will give up easily. She decided to gamble everything on this exhibition. Whether it's the past 22 years of life or the future career, as long as you have it in your hands, put it all on stage. Either die or live. There was no third path in front of Paulina. I don't have time to debug anymore, Paulina said with a slightly bitter smile after listening to Dussander's words. I will explain everything to the audience during the presentation. Dussander looked seriously at the young inventor in front of him and then let out a soft sigh. I wish you all the best. Although Paulina had already been sentenced to death in her heart, Dussander couldn't allow himself to sit idly by. The device that appears in front of us is an important invention that will change the entire process of human history. More importantly, the manufacturing of internal combustion engines and related industries. It is very profitable. Without economic independence, there can be no personal independence. Dussander has a very profound understanding of this principle. I am only 10 years old now, and there is nothing that can be called a foreign aid. He doesn't even have the system and cheats that are standard for the Pathfinder. When his mother provided him with clothing, food, housing, transportation, and a series of care for him without compensation, Dussander's personal opinion became insignificant. Father Duchamp, as a fleet commander, was stationed in the satellite orbit of Nuzol all year round, and everything at home was basically decided by his mother. According to imperial law, as long as the guardian agrees, a male can get married at the age of 12. If we continue to develop at this pace, in another 2 years, Dussander will definitely marry Lorraine. Although noble families have a high status, the cost of maintaining their status is significant. Although my mother is a gentle and kind person, I believe she will not refuse the support sent by the in-laws family. Although the Lorraine family is not a nobleman, as the general sales agent of United Mining, Mr. Wensal and Ms. Blani have substantial wealth. And these two individuals, who have been ordinary clerks of the mining consortium for 20 years and have been able to reach this position as civilians, naturally cannot be fools. They flattered Baroness Androni in an almost obsequious way and, in such a disrespectful manner, publicized to the outside world the purpose of attempting a marriage alliance. This can only indicate that what they want is far more important than self-esteem and family reputation. Even more important than a daughter's lifelong happiness. The value of this thing is extremely high, and it can only be achieved by marrying Lorraine to oneself. The fiefdom of Baroness Androni is located locally in Nuzol, and the fiefdom does not produce coal. The purpose of marrying the Baroness's family is naturally not as simple as to increase their already abundant wealth. Their goal is undoubtedly in the name of nobility. Making their daughter a baroness is very good, and of course, it would be best to have a grandson who can inherit the title. With the name of the nobility in their thick wallets, perhaps in another decade, a young female counselor with an extremely beautiful appearance and willing to sacrifice everything for the family's interests will appear in Nuzol's parliament. The impure motives of his expectant parents made Dussander naturally resistant, but what made Dussander most unwilling to get married was another matter. To be honest, marrying a beautiful and wealthy little lowly back home may wake up many people laughing in the middle of the night. But if the little lowly who married home was Lorraine, Dussander probably wouldn't dare to close her eyes even when she slept at night. This child's personality is too frightening. When the two first met, 6-year-old Lorraine had a very outgoing personality. Because she is 2 years older than Dussander, she always identifies as her sister when she meets Dussander. And he also takes great care of this little brother who has an introverted aura on his body. But after she started receiving tutoring at the age of 8, Rowling's personality suddenly underwent a huge change. She went from being a cheerful little girl who liked to run in the small woods to suddenly becoming an excellent lady who spoke out for the benefit of her family. If we really get married in the future, if one day Lorraine thinks it's best to kill herself for the sake of the family's interests, and then kidnap her son to make the nobles. Wouldn't it be like she, who has just crossed over, had to cross over again? If it were for free love, maybe Dussander could even bring back Lorraine's personality. But now they have decided to agree to the engagement for the sake of their family's interests, and they are saying, it's better to marry you than to be a concubine for a nobleman in his 50s. This is treating me as a backup. How can a great man of 4 feet, about 1.2 meters, be a spare tire for a little lowly? Dussander has a dream that needs to be built on the foundation of smoothly improving internal combustion engines, commercializing them, and suddenly becoming rich. He wants to use his huge income to make his mother and father respect his opinions, at least not immediately get engaged to Rowling. Then, relying on his identity as a self-made wealthy generation, he went to reasonable, legal, and compliant ways to soak up Lorraine. By the way, turn this little girl with a mind full of family interests into a normal girl with a worldview and values that match her own. To achieve this life goal, first of all, we need to find a way to keep Paulina in Nuzul, by our side. Beside the lounge, in the corridor leading to the main building, Dussander saw his mother wearing a beige long dress. Compared to the clothing of other nobles, Androni's dress can be considered simple. But combined with her gentle and elegant temperament and dignified face, the simple dress actually adds to her temperament as the hostess. Mild yet not overheated, dignified yet not distant. Androni is like a natural convener and arbitrator, always able to calm those around her, temporarily put aside sharp conflicts and seek ways to reconcile. Have you already seen that invention? Androni crouched down slightly and gently touched Dussander's head. How do you feel? Do you not quite understand what it does? I've seen it. Dussander squinted his eyes and waited for the touch to end. If you request to terminate this action in advance, the mother will be very unhappy. That inventor is very talented. I had never heard of Imperial University having female students before. Androni smiled and said, since she was admitted to the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Imperial University, Paulina has been a regular in various newspapers and magazines in Olympia. She is indeed very talented, which is also one of the reasons why I decided to help her. Although his mother didn't say it directly, Dussander was very confident that this helper was referring to this ball. My mother has some sympathy for this stubborn inventor, which is a good thing. Beneficial for the follow-up plan of Dussander. After all, Paulina is a remarkable figure in the stagnant waters of the empire, who has successfully broken down prejudice against women through personal efforts. As a woman, Androni sympathizes with her and is willing to help her a little. This is also a very normal thing. Why does she appear in the newspaper? Dussander asked with a naive and curious expression, is it because she has done many remarkable feats? Androni's expression was a bit strange. She shook her head and said simply, many newspapers are waiting to see her jokes. It seemed inappropriate to discuss these topics with her 10-year-old son, but Androni changed the topic and said, are you getting along well with Miss Lorraine? It's pretty good, Dussander nodded seriously. If her parents weren't so eager to marry Miss Lorraine to me, it might be even better. After being amused by her son's words for a while, Androni said seriously, discussing marriage is still a bit early for you now. Let's talk about it in 2 years. I want to learn more knowledge, Dussander, who was keenly aware of the starting point, immediately followed up. If only Miss Paulina could be my teacher. It's the first time I've seen you, mother, so interested in someone. Androni smiled and said, Polytechnic Paulina is not an ordinary tutor. If this presentation is successful, we may have to pay a very generous salary to attract her to stay on the estate and become your teacher. If she really stays, will you learn from her well? Dussander nodded vigorously and loudly replied, I will. As for the salary issue, you don't have to worry too much. Her presentation is definitely going to fail. Dussander muttered in his heart, deciding to stand by the inventor's side throughout the exhibition to prevent her from making any extreme moves due to failure. For example, getting angry from embarrassment and then waving a wrench to smash this epoch-making great invention. It's almost time. Androni looked at the pocket watch hidden around her waist, then stood up and said to Dussander, Darling, can you please dance the first dance with Lorraine later? On the wall, about 1.5 feet high, hundreds of gas lamps produced by Olin's White Flame Company are emitting a stable yellow light. For dance halls that can easily accommodate hundreds of people, relying solely on these gas lamps for lighting is clearly not enough. Therefore, 2 large crystal flint lamps were specially installed in the center of the dance hall. The servants in the basement quantitatively poured flint wrapped in asbestos mesh into the reaction vessel based on the pointer value of the pressure gauge. The flint thrown into the reaction vessel will interact with the water in the vessel and produce a large number of bubbles. The gas in these bubbles has a strong garlic smell, so it is also safer to use. As long as the servants do not smell garlic in the room, there is nothing to worry about. These gases are collected by the pipeline above the reaction vessel and then enter the flint burner on the ceiling along the pipeline. There are lime blocks inside the burner, and when ignited by this gas flame, the lime blocks emit a dazzling white light. The most suitable way to neutralize and enhance the light of the surrounding gas lamps. However, during combustion, flint lamps still inevitably produce some black smoke and odors, and at this time, the exhaust fan at the top of the dance hall can come in handy. Despite the boiler running at full capacity, the room can still maintain a suitable temperature. But the nobles did not care how much coal the boiler needed to burn in a day. They are more concerned about whether their dance moves at the ball are graceful, whether their speech is in line with their identity, and whether their social circle evaluation of themselves has increased, rather than the money they bring to themselves by going to the industry. The band began to play, and under the guidance of a soft and lively string orchestra, the nobles holding drinks on the dance floor gradually stopped communicating. They began to cast their gaze towards the center of the dance floor, the hostess with a gentle expression but a captivating demeanor. Welcome everyone. She picked up her crystal goblet and said, In the honor of His Majesty the Emperor, we are gathered here today. The nobles around raised their glasses together and randomly agreed, Your Majesty's glory. To celebrate the 175th anniversary of the founding of Nuzol and also to congratulate the esteemed Duke of Nuzol on his seat in the Imperial House of Lords, we are holding a celebration here. Androni raised her glass and said, For the Duke's health. After the usual toast, the male nobles raised their glasses and drank the drink in one gulp. And the other ladies, like Androni, gently took a sip of the glass from her mouth. The ball will start soon. Before that, please allow me to introduce to you the only female technician at Imperial University in its 500-year history. Ms. Paulina. Androni smiled and extended her hand backwards, and what she brought with her, the greatest invention of this era. The gas engine. Dussander, huddled next to the dessert table with Lorraine, hugged her chest with both hands and stared closely at the door of the lounge. He has already begun to sympathize with Paulina. My mother, out of kindness, provided very positive publicity for her appearance. And this behavior will undoubtedly arouse the curiosity and expectation of the surrounding nobles. When they realize that their expectations have been dashed due to the inability of the machine to operate properly, Paulina is likely to face the most intense criticism and difficulties. Dussander sighed and decided to stand idly by for the time being in pursuit of his goals. Although doing so is somewhat unethical, it can even be said to be taking advantage of someone's situation. But only in this way can Paulina realize how precious the olive branch she handed out is. Thinking of this, Dussander glanced at Lorraine standing beside him, quiet and somewhat curious. Then he gently shook his head. If it weren't for your personality issues, why would I bother to mess with this amazing female inventor? End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Survival in Defeat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This translator is experiencing an error, please try another translator. Chapter 6. Transactions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Transactions. The display of the gas engine achieved great success. Under the strong blowing of the steam fan and the oxygen decomposed from heated hydrogen peroxide, the gas engine miraculously started running. Engines that do not rely on coal, have minimal noise, and are naturally smaller in size than steam engines have emerged. The nobles watched with great interest for a long time, then exclaimed in amazement. And then there was no more. No one presented their business cards in a competitive and intense manner, no one even showed more interest in this invention. The gas engine ran for about a quarter of a quarter of a quarter of a quarter, and then began to make strange noises. Before Paulina's emergency shutdown, with a metallic clang, the gas engine had already stopped running on its own. Considering that the fuel used in the internal combustion engine is highly flammable, and there is also a source of ignition and oxygen at the intake, Dussander rushed to the fuel tank and used all his strength to tighten the valve. Take away the kettle to prevent further generation of oxygen, turn off the steam lamp to prevent danger caused by oxygen combustion. Starting from the compulsory education stage, Dussander's awareness of safety operation norms repeatedly cultivated by teachers finally came into use. There were no fires or other more serious accidents at the dance venue. The nobles politely applauded and paid tribute to Paulina, then watched as the female inventor pulled away her great creation. No one cares about the significance of her invention. A machine that can only run for a few minutes has no practical application value. The ball began, and as the waltz was played by the band, Paulina's dream of being a great inventor also shattered. She was alone in the lounge, curled up barefoot on the sofa, burying her head deep in her arms. Just now she has dismantled the gas engine and conducted a preliminary inspection of the combustion chamber. There are traces of metal melting and re-cooling on both the cylinder and piston. The connecting rod connecting the piston and crankshaft has also undergone severe bending deformation. Such a big damage, the piston and cylinder are definitely completely scrapped. Once these two components are scrapped, the entire machine is considered a pile of waste. Although nobles have always been synonymous with foolishness, no matter how foolish the nobles are, they cannot use the gold list to invest in a pile of waste. To find the cause of component damage, improve the design and verify whether the improved design is reasonable. This requires throwing piles of gold pounds into material and mechanical design, as well as calculation, in order to possibly produce a result. And Paulina has no money. She now has only 2 sets of clothes left, as well as 8-shilling bills and about 12 pence in change in her wallet. These funds combined are not even enough to pay for her risky return to Orange shipping ticket. Paulina fell into confusion. She didn't even know what she should do next. The mechanical clock in the corner is ringing with a fixed rhythm. When the minute hand points to 0, a metal bird coated with enamel colors will jump out of the top of the vertical clock, then open its pointed mouth and spray a burst of water vapor towards the ceiling, accompanied by short bursts of whistle sound. The second whistle sounded, and Paulina, curled up on the sofa, suddenly heard the sound of opening the door. Amidst the sound of music in the dance hall, Dussander and Lorraine walked into the lounge together. "I've been looking for you in the dance hall for a long time." Dussander felt a little relieved when he saw Paulina in the lounge. After the demonstration just ended, he was forced to stay in the dance hall because he had to dance the first dance with Lorraine. After finishing the dance, he realized that Paulina had disappeared. Dussander is very worried. It's not that he felt that his gentle and kind mother would lose face and throw Paulina and her invention out of the estate in a fit of anger. He was even more worried that Paulina would be completely discouraged by the lack of attention this time and lose confidence in the internal combustion engine. His first bucket of gold in his future life will depend on this beautiful female inventor. Paulina curled up on the sofa, feeling very down. She just raised her head and gave Dussander a smile that was even uglier than crying. Dussander was about to say something when Lorraine suddenly spoke on the side. "Lord Dussander, please go out first," Lorraine ordered with the resolute tone and non-negotiable aura of a future hostess. At the same time, she began to untie the lace scarf around her neck and said, "Wait a little at the door and you can come in." This brainless request made Dussander a bit incomprehensible, but after seeing Lorraine's gaze, he decided to follow it first and then privately ask what had happened. After watching Dussander leave the room, Lorraine first walked to the door to confirm that it was closed, and then quickly walked to Paulina's side. Then she covered her feet with a lace scarf that she had already held in her hand. Although top technicians generally don't care much about appearance, as a woman, you still need to pay more attention to yourself. Rowling frowned and scolded the female inventor, who was at least a decade older than herself, without hesitation. "How can you wear stockings with holes in your toes when you come to a noble ball?" Paulina lifted her head and nervously tried to cover her feet with her skirt, then returned the expensive lace scarf to the beautiful little girl in front of her. "All right, let's just leave it like this." Rowling's eyebrows furrowed deeper and deeper as she criticized again, "The dress you're wearing today is a medium-length one, and it's not suitable for a ball like this. And you're pulling the hem up to your feet to expose your chest completely. Cover my scarf on your feet and don't move around, Lord Dussander is coming in." Paulina opened her mouth and said with a small gesture, "Thank you. I am Lorraine, the fiancée of Lord Dussander." Lorraine turned her body and sat on the sofa next to Paulina in a very graceful posture. When Lord Dussander wants to have a private conversation with another lady, it is my responsibility as fiancée to create suitable conditions for both parties. Paulina opened her mouth slightly in surprise and asked, "Are you engaged to Lord Dussander?" "At today's ball, we danced our first dance together," Rowling said naturally. "This is the tradition of Nuzul. 2 years before the announcement of engagement, ladies will dance their first dance with their fiancé at the ball held at their future husband's house." Paulina nodded slightly and then showed a guilty expression. "I was showing off at such an important ball, but it turned out to be a complete failure. I'm really sorry. At such an important ball, my fiancé left all the guests behind and came to talk to you in detail. For this conversation, I even kicked him out and made some arrangements." Rowling straightened her back slightly, smiled, and stared closely at the door of the lounge. "If you're still planning to talk to Lord Dussander with such an inappropriate expression and tone, that's truly impolite." The oak door was slowly pushed open, and Dussander revealed half of his face through the crack in the door. He asked cautiously, "Can I come in now?" "Come on in," Rowling said. "Ms. Paulina was a bit tired just now, and now she's much better." Dussander pushed open the door completely and then found a vacant seat to sit down. He earnestly said to Paulina, "Your invention has been running very successfully. The piston has melted down, and there are traces of melted metal on the cylinder walls," Paulina sighed. "This machine is completely scrapped. It doesn't even have any repair value. But that doesn't mean your invention is worthless." Dussander began his encouragement work. "The internal combustion engine has many advantages that steam engines cannot match. Your invention is consistent with your declaration, and it is indeed the greatest invention of this era." Paulina showed a slightly bitter smile, although Dussander was the first to point out serious flaws in her design, which made Paulina somewhat unhappy. But now, Dussander has become the only person in the entire Nuzul who praises her invention. This feeling is very complex. Nobles are often more inclined to fund inventions that already have full potential for use, Dussander explained. Your invention has epoch-making significance, but it is still a newborn. It has just been born, fragile, and prone to illness. More importantly, newborns are certainly not as powerful as foals of the same age. As Paulina's expression softened, Dussander continued to advise, you would choose to come to Nuzur, so you should have understood the characteristics of this place, right? Nuzur's coal reserves are not large, but mining is difficult. Moreover, the quality of coal itself is not very good. Therefore, the price of coal here is very high. Internal combustion engines that do not use coal as a fuel power source will have the best development prospects here. Paulina really doesn't know this. She will come to Nuzul simply because of that threat. And the ticket as a personal gift. I am very interested in this invention. As Paulina's expression became more and more relaxed, Dussander felt that it might be time to make a suggestion now. After pausing for a few seconds, he leaned forward and said, I am willing to pay 500 gold pounds to purchase all the patented technology of your invention. I will establish a company for the research and production of internal combustion engines, and I can give you half of all the profits obtained from selling internal combustion engines. Dussander continued, before the establishment of the company and the start of production and sales, you can live on the estate as my personal tutor. The salary is at least 1 gold pound per week, and I will provide you with free food and accommodation. Dussander stared at Paulina's eyes and said, as long as you agree, I can give you the check now. Paulina didn't say a word for a long time, while Lorraine beside her widened her eyes. She blinked at Dussander several times in a row, but never received a response. So, Lorraine coughed lightly and reminded, Mr. Lord, those 500 gold pounds are the funds that Mrs. Androni used to purchase a good horse for you. By this time next year, those well-trained horses will be arriving in Nuzul. If you use this funds to cause any problems with the transaction, Mrs. Androni will have to compensate the horse dealer another 200 gold pounds. Lorraine is reminding Dussander that some money should not be tampered with. Moreover, the expenditure of 500 gold pounds is not a small amount even for Mrs. Androni. I definitely wouldn't do this for other projects. But if we were to mass-produce this type of gas engine, I think we should be able to recoup all 500 pounds of investment within 6 months. Dussander was very confident in this, and he even wanted to drag Lorraine in. Do you want to come together? I can set aside 50 pounds of shares for you. Lorraine glanced at Dussander and was about to reject her fiancé's foolish idea directly. But as she spoke, she suddenly furrowed her eyebrows. I've never seen you take making money so seriously before, Rolling asked Dussander again. Are you sure this thing works? A steam horse that runs for 4/4 of an hour requires at least 2 shillings worth of coal, Dussander nodded and said. And a can of gas that can run a gas engine for 4/4 of an hour only requires at most 1 shillings. The operating cost is reduced by half, and the weight is also greatly reduced. Just replacing those steam horses is a big deal. There is another reason to promote the rapid replacement of steam engines by internal combustion engines, but Dussander did not directly state it. The coal prices in Nuzur have been slowly rising. Last year, the butler in the estate once said that the winter coal price had risen to 28 pence per pound. Such a rapid increase will inevitably make it difficult for more and more households to afford coal prices. If internal combustion engines can replace a large number of steam engines, the demand for coal fuel will decrease, and the relative price will naturally decrease. Those merchants who originally hoarded a large amount of coal for profit will inevitably quickly sell all the coal they have in their hands in order to reduce losses. Once the decline in coal prices becomes a climate change, the burden on ordinary people to buy coal will definitely decrease significantly. In this way, perhaps more people can afford coal in winter. But he really can't tell Lorraine directly about this reason. Lorraine's parents are the largest coal importers and distributors in the entire Nuzul region. It can even be said that the couple who spread rumors about their impending engagement everywhere is one of the main reasons for the rise in coal prices in Nuzur. Unexpectedly, Lorraine frowned and pondered for a while before stretching her brows and saying, "Let's do this. I won't invest directly. But if this product succeeds in making a profit, then I want a 10% profit. If you fail to make a profit, or if you are unable to pay that £500 expenditure on time, then I will bear the compensation that Mrs. Androni needs to pay to the horse dealer. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Improvement Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Improvement Plan. Dussander reached an agreement with Lorraine on investment matters. This made Paulina curled up on the sofa very excited. Obtaining support from the nobility was originally one of her important purposes when she came to Newsall. Although she did not receive any funding from other nobles, the funding proposed by Dussander really moved her. 500 gold pounds. This is enough for her to manufacture at least 20 gas engines on her own. It's still the cost of using a whole piece of high-quality metal for all components, and then handcrafting them with a lathe, milling machine, and quenching furnace. If we can secure this investment and find a qualified foundry locally to pre-cast the components, perhaps the cost of the gas engine can be compressed to less than 10 gold pounds. Compared to a steam horse that requires at least 25 gold pounds, the competitive advantage of gas engines is enormous. But this matter is not that simple either. Paulina interrupted Dussander and Lorraine's somewhat excited discussion and interjected, "Lord Dussander, there are some things I must tell you in advance." She took a deep breath and honestly exposed the biggest problem with the internal combustion engine. If it were in Olin, you would definitely be right to invest in my invention. But this is Newsall, a plateau planet with an equivalent altitude of 2,400 yols. To promote gas engines, we can't have a kettle filled with bleach hanging in front of the intake of each gas engine, and a few pieces of burning coal placed below it, right? Even if I could use this method to make the gas engine run, would have to completely redesign and improve the internal materials of the gas engine. Paulina looked puzzled. If we had to choose special steel again to prevent melting during the internal combustion process, the solution cycle for this problem could be very long. The cost could also be very high. This is a very practical issue, and Paulina must clearly point out the potential risks that may arise during the investment process. Of course, she could take advantage of this opportunity to receive investment funds and then save all of her tutoring salary. After 1 year, she will be able to directly flee to other planets with at least 40 gold pounds. Or even more ruthlessly, disappear with 540 gold pounds. But the consequence of doing so is that her invention completely loses the opportunity for further development. And she will inevitably be wanted by the Empire, living forever in anxiety. Paulina didn't want to see such a thing happen. She would rather work diligently on her own and then invest the saved funds into improving the gas engine. A weekly salary of £1 of gold is enough for her to at least rebuild a gas engine. There is no need to take risks. Dussander had already prepared a solution to this problem, but he did not expect that Paulina would specifically address this issue after she issued her investment proposal. "I appreciate your honesty," Dussander nodded with a smile before saying, "However, this problem is not very difficult to solve." Dussander flipped out of bed like a carp, full of energy today. After 3 years of struggle, he finally gained the privilege of dressing himself and washing himself up in the morning. As long as there is no dance party, he can decide what clothes to wear every day, which is already the maximum freedom he can obtain. And this kind of freedom may gradually deepen from today on, which makes Dussander full of expectations for the future. "Good morning, dear." In the restaurant, my mother was wearing ordinary home clothes and eating breakfast. After seeing Dussander with messy hair appear in the restaurant, she first stood up to smooth out her son's hairstyle as if he had experienced an explosion before saying, "Did you wake up early today? Ms. Paulina will come to teach me today, right?" Dussander couldn't hide his excitement as he sat in his seat, grabbed the bread next to him, and stuffed it into his mouth. "I can't wait any more." "I'm afraid Ms. Paulina won't be teaching you so soon, my dear," Baroness Androni said with a smile. Yesterday's presentation was so successful, she drank almost half a bottle of Bordeaux red wine excitedly at the ball. The hangover and the headache it brought were not so easy to relieve. Quickly finishing his breakfast, Dussander began to move around in the courtyard of the estate. Just had a full meal, so don't think about intense exercise. Dussander imitated the appearance of an old man he had seen in the park in his previous life, swinging his hands up and down on both sides, and taking a walk along the horse-riding path paved with pure white stones. In order to protect the hooves of those precious horses, these stones specially transported from Olin must be pre-polished. Not too sharp, but also not too smooth. After digging a pit about a quarter of a year deep in the middle of the lawn, use charcoal to cushion it and lay polished white stones on top. This is considered as creating a horse-riding trail suitable for horses to run on. After walking on the horse-riding path for a while, feeling completely warm and slightly sweating on his head, Dussander saw Lorraine sitting on the side saddle at the corner of the horse-riding path. "Good day, Ms. Lorraine." Dussander waved his hand to Lorraine happily. "You came quite early today. Today is Teacher Paulina's first day of class." Rolling, holding a thick and hard leather notebook, grabbed her little white horse and gently wiped the sweat from her forehead. "I have never been exposed to mechanical design-related courses before, so I decided to come over early to preview." "Then you may be disappointed," he said, swinging his hands towards Dussander, who was slightly red and swollen, and rubbing his wrist. "I heard my mother say before. Last night after we left, Teacher Paulina drank a lot of alcohol. I probably can't come to class as scheduled." Lorraine glanced at Dussander rubbing her wrist and asked, "Have you seen Teacher Paulina?" "Not yet." Dussander shook his head. Disturbing a lady with a hangover is not a gentleman's behavior. Lorraine smiled lightly and said, "Then your judgment may have been wrong. The Baroness was not in the lounge last night and didn't see the expression of Teacher Paulina, and you." Her smile deepened. "You don't understand women." After learning that Dussander had a way to solve the difficulty of starting the gas engine, Teacher Paulina's excitement in her eyes was like that of a wealthy woman seeing a huge diamond at a reasonable price. They will never give up their plan to take a steam carriage to the big shopping mall the next morning just because they had a hangover the day before. The course, originally scheduled to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, was eventually slightly delayed by a quarter of an hour. "I'm curious, what exactly was the solution you mentioned last night?" Paulina's hair was meticulous, but the dark circles under her eyes and occasional wrinkles between her eyebrows indicated that she was suffering from a hangover. "I've been thinking for a long time, but still can't figure it out. Before I answer, perhaps you can finish this cup of warm water first." Dussander didn't answer the question directly, he just insisted on letting Paulina drink more hot water. This can effectively alleviate the headache caused by a hangover. Headache after a hangover is caused by the diuretic effect of ethanol, which leads to dehydration in the brain. The shrunken brain floats in the cerebrospinal fluid, making it easier to float and collide with the skull compared to normal conditions. That's why there is a headache caused by this positional change. The solution to treating this headache is also very simple. Drink plenty of hot water. Paulina reluctantly started pouring hot water into her cup, while Dussander was satisfied and began explaining her thoughts after seeing the other party drink half of the water. "From the appearance, your invention itself is a compression ignition." Dussander began his reasoning. From the appearance of the gas engine, the compression ignition temperature of gas itself is relatively high, but in the equivalent altitude of New Zoll, where the temperature is lower than Olin, the compression ignition of gas is very difficult. Paulina put down her clean water glass and said to Dussander, "So, your initial emergency plan was to increase the oxygen supply. This solves the problem of higher equivalent altitude, but this method can only be used as a temporary solution." Dussander nodded and said, "To solve the difficulty of starting, we can start from two perspectives. Making compression ignition easier or increasing the intake volume. Finding these two perspectives is not difficult, but solving them is very troublesome." Paulina frowned and asked, "Is there a specific plan?" "I have two solutions to make compression ignition easier," Dussander said confidently. Heating the fuel delivery pipeline to increase the temperature of the gas before entering the cylinder, or spraying ether into the cylinder in advance. Both of these solutions should be able to easily solve the problem of difficult starting of the gas engine. The key to the compression combustion process is to allow the mixture of fuel and air to be rapidly heated to the ignition point and burned under high pressure. Of course, electric ignition can easily achieve this process, but Dussander himself does not have the relevant knowledge required for high-voltage electric ignition. Meanwhile, the Empire seems to have not conducted any related research. So, we can only focus on the fuel temperature. Preheating the gas is a good way to lower the pressure ignition threshold, and the same principle applies to pre-injecting ether. The compression ignition temperature of ether is very low, and its ignition point is much lower than that of gas under high pressure in the cylinder. In other words, it can be pre-burned, then drive the combustion of gas, and make the subsequent combustion operation possible. Paulina's invention is not only groundbreaking, but also a very advanced mode of internal combustion engine. This internal combustion engine has 4 cylinders and has been designed with 4 strokes since its inception. Compared to single-cylinder 2-stroke machines, this type of gas engine can directly bypass the yet-to-be-developed spark plug technology and put the internal combustion engine into use. Paulina was shocked and looked at her students. After a while, she whispered, "Have you ever seen a similar machine before?" "No," Dussander smiled brightly. "However, a lot of knowledge is universal, and as long as you understand the principles behind it, making some improvements is not difficult. I am shocked that you can invent such a masterpiece. This machine has a high level of maturity and can be put into use almost immediately." 2 passionate enthusiasts of internal combustion engines, one big and one small, exchanged their interests with their eyes lit up, while Rowling, who was preparing to record the class content with a feather pen dipped in water, was somewhat at a loss. The communication between her fiancé and the teacher. She couldn't understand a single word. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. People. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. People. Dussander spent a whole afternoon, along with 2 cups of black tea, a bouquet of flowers, and 6 cream cakes, to coax Lorraine back together. When he saw Lorraine's smile reappear, Dussander felt a thin layer of sweat rising from behind him. People in their 30s are still doing such things. Dussander felt a bit sad. But he quickly regained his energy. In fact, this kind of Lorraine is somewhat human. This is stronger than that doll lady who doesn't show her emotions. Are the improvements you mentioned today really useful? Lorraine decided to pay attention to her fiancé's academic development while eating Dussander's next week's quota of cream cake. I see that teacher Paulina seems very excited. What I propose are only some unverified ideas and suggestions, Dussander habitually said humbly. Fortunately, it seems that teacher Paulina has indeed been inspired. I spent a whole day today, but I didn't write anything in my notebook, Rowling muttered. This is not cost-effective. Lorraine had something to say, and Dussander smiled bitterly and said, "How about I teach you the basics? Let's start with mathematics." Dussander himself hasn't studied much about imperial laws and regulations, so it's better to avoid teaching others. However, he is quite good at things like mathematics. The mathematical systems of empires and Earth are the same. Both are decimal and use numbers with almost identical appearances. The only difference is that the empire did not have a systematic education system, and the educational habits preferred by various family teachers were also different. In order to gain a rough idea of Lorraine's specific mathematical level, Dussander spent about 2/4 of an hour compiling a set of test papers. And it took Lorraine over an hour to finish the answering process. 12-year-old Rowling has a math level roughly equivalent to that of a 4th-grade elementary school student on Earth. She can master addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of 3-digit numbers, mixed operations, and decimals, but her knowledge of plane geometry is basically blank. At this level of mathematics, let's not worry about the content of mechanical design for now. It is more important to have a solid foundation. Mathematics is a subject that has no shortcuts to take. To master it, you can only repeatedly do problems to familiarize yourself with the process. Dussander reluctantly spread out his hand and cautiously suggested, otherwise. I'll find you some exercises to do during this time, and you can improve your math skills first. Lorraine thought for a moment, then nodded and emphasized, if there's anything I don't know, then it's a direct question. You have to teach me well. Don't worry, Dussander nodded solemnly and said, as long as we're together these days, you can ask any questions you want. I'll definitely explain everything to you. When two children were tormented by linear equations in the lounge, Paulina was desperately sketching in her own room. Both of Dussander's suggestions can theoretically solve the problems encountered by gas engines. However, in the field of mechanical engineering, the time, effort, and even money required to transform an idea from a verbal principle explanation to implementation are extremely enormous. If she were still in Olin, Paulina, who now carries a whopping 500 pounds of gold, could easily break down the entire research project into several pieces and outsource it. She can hire research labs from Imperial University or other metallurgical companies to find alloy formulas that are more heat-resistant and tough. Alternatively, hire a research laboratory from Imperial College of Technology to search for the optimal pre-mixing ratio of ether and gas in the Nuzol environment. Anyway, as long as someone is in Olin, as long as there is a golden pound in their pocket. The top and most useful brain of the entire empire can be used by her. But now she is in Nuzol. This is not a planet dominated by academic and imperial departments like Olin, but a small and picturesque place with a unique position in the empire due to its tourism, vacation, and financial services industries. Materials science and mechanical design have never been Nuzer's strengths. There is no way for Paulina to conduct subcontracting research on this planet, let alone where she should go. Then let's all do it ourselves, anyway it's a bit cheaper. So, after finishing the process of teaching in the morning, which was actually discussion, Paulina entered her room alone and began to modify her original design with a drawing ruler. It wasn't until Baroness Androni and her attendants knocked on her door that she realized she seemed a bit hungry. As she wobbled open her door, Paulina saw Baroness Androni with a serious expression on her face, as well as the gloomy-looking butler. Miss Paulina, the butler's face turned even worse when he saw the room with dishes on its face and a floor full of discarded calculation papers. And Baroness Androni's face was a bit gentle, are you working? Paulina easily scratched her messy hair and quickly put her hand down. She lifted her skirt and bowed awkwardly to Androni before apologizing, I will pay attention to keeping the room tidy in the future. Most of the senior technicians don't pay much attention to the environment when they work. Androni's expression seemed to soften even more. She nodded at Paulina and asked, these things are just to perfect the products invested by Lord Dussander, right? Paulina first shook her head and then immediately widened her eyes, Lord Dussander has already told you. After reaching an investment agreement with Dussander last night, Dussander and Lorraine emphasized to her for a long time, Mrs. Androni must not know about this matter. As a result, this afternoon, Mrs. Androni knew what had happened. And he even came directly to the door to inquire in person. This feeling is really not good. Before opening the door, I thought I had to make sure you returned the check, Androni said with a smile as she stood still in the messy room. Although that money is already Lord Dussander's personal property, it is still too much for a 10-year-old man. After hearing these words, Paulina naturally felt a bit helpless, but after all, 500 gold pounds. This money was indeed too much, and she could very well understand Mrs. Androni's concerns. Despite having such a sum of money, she was able to quickly rebuild an improved gas engine and promote it to the market after conducting experiments. Paulina was ready to accept reality, while Mrs. Androni continued, but after seeing the results of your work, I think maybe his choice wasn't a bad idea. As a noble living in Nuzol, Mrs. Androni also has many of her own investment projects. And in nearly 20 years of investment, she has developed her own set of methods. Ultimately, investment is betting on the future of a company or a commodity. And it is people who operate companies, and it is also people who develop products. Mrs. Androni is more willing to invest in people than in investment companies or commodities. As long as she invests in the right person, she can earn many times more profits than simply investing. Although there is still a lack of more detailed understanding, it seems that Paulina is indeed a person worth investing in now. Dussander's decision doesn't seem so bad now. You can keep that check for now, but you won't be able to withdraw the money inside until it matures, Mrs. Androni said with a smile. Lord Dussander doesn't have such experience, so he's not quite sure. However, this investment is still valid. The funds you need for work will be paid to you by me. When the check is due and cashed, you can withdraw the money spent during this period from the check to me. She nodded at Paulina and advised, improving inventions is important, but please don't forget your job as a private tutor. Ah. All right. Paulina agreed in a flustered tone, then said, the previous tutor's work achievements were very good, and Lord Dussander has a very good grasp of professional knowledge. But their relationship with Dussander was not very smooth. Every mother likes to hear others praise her child, and Mrs. Androni showed a gentle smile. I used to wonder if it was because he was a male teacher that he didn't get along well with those teachers. Of course, Dussander didn't know that his image in his mother's mind had fallen to a point where he found it difficult to get along with male teachers. This was somewhat outrageous. After all, he also needs to deal with Rolling's very unfamiliar and untimely collusion while explaining the linear equations of one variable. Lorraine will proactively offer to help bear the penalty, which is not just for the sake of future profits. Mrs. Al, as an etiquette tutor, had long taught Lorraine the technique of making men admire her. And the most crucial point is, make him your companion instead of the target. If it's just to increase one's charm, then what attracts you is just a fool who values appearance. Mrs. Eyre really likes Lorraine and always talks to her with an unconscious smile. Of course, a lady's appearance is a very important aspect, but we all get older. When you lose your beautiful appearance or are no longer as beautiful as before, a man who values appearance will not hesitate to abandon you. Women living in empires are like this, and we only have one way to realize our own life value. The elf man lovingly touched Lorraine's head and said, men are unreliable, but we can only rely on them. So, we must choose a partner who will not abandon you. Becoming companions with them is a good start. Although men also like to betray their partners, the probability is lower than abandoning a woman who only looks good. Undertake possible penalty for breach of contract, with the aim of receiving education from teacher Paulina with Dussander in good name. As long as we can be together frequently, the likelihood of becoming a companion is also higher. Of course, simple pure relationships are not enough. Lorraine has always believed that Dussander and herself have some emotional foundation. But after all, he is still young, and his relationship with him seems more like siblings than unmarried couples. So, some appropriate hints are also important. She must make Dussander realize that she is not only a sister 2 years older than him, but also opposite sex. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Debt. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 10. Mercy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Mercy. People who have no money to repay their debts need to spend money to declare bankruptcy. If he borrows money from the nobility, he doesn't even have the qualification to go bankrupt. This kind of magical reality is a very natural and common phenomenon in Newsall, and even throughout the entire empire. Anyway, no one will sympathize with those bankrupts. It's all their own trouble. A person without money is not eligible for bankruptcy. So, you want to sell the machine tool to raise money and file for bankruptcy. Dussander gestured to the diligent guard to put the person down, then frowned and asked, "Why are you here to find a buyer?" "There will be 2 auctions today, including 6 machine tools." Rosen's face is covered in traces of brushed coal ash, and he explained stutteringly with a nasal tone, I think if someone is willing to buy cheap second-hand machine tools, maybe they can also buy mine." Rosen took a deep breath and pleaded, "Sir, are you willing to buy it? My machine tools, as long as the starting price of those auction machines is enough. If your machine tool is in good condition, I will buy it at a more suitable price." Dussander decided to do something good, at least for this young man who looks about his age. The purpose of Dussander's trip is to purchase a steam machine tool with good maintenance at an appropriate price. If the purchased machine tool can still bring some help to a struggling family, then this business would be even more cost-effective. "Young master, there may be a problem here," the guard said in a low voice. "I suggest you reconsider." Dussander thought for a moment and said, "After Teacher Paulina and Todd come back, you should go back to the estate immediately. Bring 20 more guards." Todd was the other of the 2 guards. "And," Dussander added again, "tell your mother about this and bring 2 steam carriages with family badges." Dussander came to the Albin bankruptcy court with the aim of buying a cheap steam machine tool. It would be great if you could help others when purchasing machine tools. But the prerequisite is that you cannot let yourself and Paulina get into danger and trouble. So, Dussander, who had only been in this world for 10 years, decisively chose to rely on the power of his mother and noble status. 20 guards and 2 steam carriages carrying the emblem of Baroness Androni were enough to awaken all the people living in the Upper Albin district. The guards of the nobility can carry weapons. Old master. Since seeing 2 carriages and 20 guards, Rosen realized that he might have encountered something extraordinary. He was a bit nervous, but he didn't dare to directly ask, "What exactly are you from?" So he could only keep apologizing. "Can you let me go back first? I'll remind my sister and grandmother to change their clothes first to avoid being impolite. According to my guard, if you take any special action now, you can directly assume that you are planning some kind of conspiracy against us." Dussander sat in the carriage seat, looking up at the auction catalogue in his hand without lifting his head. He closed the manual in his hand and looked at Rosen with a half-smile, asking, "So, is this whole process a conspiracy?" No. Rosen's dirty face turned white in fear, and he quickly explained, Our house is a bit messy." "That's okay." Dussander lowered his head again and began reading the auction album. Steam machine tools are not the kind of delicate products that cannot be used normally due to environmental chaos. It doesn't matter if the environment is chaotic at all. Paulina asked on the side, "Is it certain that your machine tool at home is a product of Thorsmith?" "That's what my father said." Rosen nodded and said, "The nameplate on the machine is also the same as what you drew before." Rosen remembers the pattern carved on this nameplate. After all, when his father was still alive, he had to wipe the metal nameplate with a coarse cloth at least 5 or 6 times a day. Every time my father finished wiping the nameplate, he would wear a satisfied smile, caressing his wild and prickly golden beard on his chin, and then say to Rosen, "This treasure will make our family truly respectable." However, now Rosen only has his grandmother and sister to rely on each other. The only way for their entire family to survive was to quickly dispose of all their assets, and then spend the rest of their lives with the elderly and young sisters in seclusion on a border planet. Thorsmith's steam machine did not make them respectable people, but instead turned them into fugitive prisoners. Rosen began to shed tears again. "If it's a product from Thorsmith, as long as it can maintain factory accuracy, then it would be a good business," Paulina whispered to Dussander. Thorsmith's machine tools are representative of imperial industrial accuracy, and the starting price for bankruptcy court machine tools is only 80 gold pounds. And a functioning Thorsmith machine tool is worth at least 200 gold pounds. "I will buy it at a suitable price," Dussander nodded to his teacher and partner. You can also take a look at the metal ingots piled up in the warehouse. If they can be used, let's buy them all at once. Carrying 500 gold pounds, Dussander and Paulina have great confidence in buying things. Sitting on an obviously expensive steam carriage, Rosen was so nervous that he couldn't even catch his breath. 3 steam carriages slowly drove into the industrial area of Upper Alban. By bypassing the large factories built with grey stone bricks and terrazzo, rows after rows of tin houses were reflected in Dussander's eyes. In industrial areas, there are also residents living there. And these residents are mostly the owners of family factories, employed workers, or the families of these 2 types of people. Around the outermost tin house, a large area of rusty tin houses appeared in front of the convoy. On both sides of the narrow and muddy street, one can directly see the swaying iron gates, as well as the hostile gazes casting at the convoy from the gates. The residents here don't seem very friendly. The guards took the initiative to increase their vigilance, while Dussander worked hard to ease the atmosphere inside the carriage. Paulina glanced at the outside environment and said, "The residents here don't usually deal with people like you, young master. When a group of hyenas break into a flock of sheep, they always pretend to have a bad expression." The carriage took a short detour on the narrow road and then stopped in front of a rusty metal hut that was barely visible. An old woman holding a metal pry bar burst out of the cabin. She was wearing the most common linen dress among the elderly women of Newzal, with her bare arms thin and veins exposed. 2 hands covered in wrinkles firmly grasped a rusty crowbar, as if ready to fight the dragon. Her grayish-white hair was messed up by the cold wind of Nuzur. She squinted her eyes and remained silent, but her eyes were full of vigilance. "Grandmother." Rosen was the first to rush off the carriage, but when he got off, he slipped and fell directly into the mud on the ground. But Rosen didn't hesitate to wipe off the mud on his face first, or to look at the wounds on his body that had been knocked open by small stones in the mud. He used all his strength and came to his grandmother holding a crowbar at the fastest speed, explaining to her the purpose of the 3 steam carriages behind him. Dussander and Paulina also got off the car together. Dussander's boots had just stepped onto the ground when a layer of mud mixed with engine oil and coal ash, emitting a pungent odor, went straight over his feet. Paulina beside her looked at least more experienced than Dussander. She had been lifting her skirt over her knees with both hands since getting off the car. "Master, please come in." Lawson persuaded his grandmother as quickly as possible, and then ran back to Dussander's side, saying, "My grandmother thought someone came to collect the debt, so she was a bit nervous." "It's okay, I've already explained it to her." The guards dispersed very tacitly and began to set up defenses around the entire cabin. At the beginning, Todd and Tom, the 2 guards who followed Dussander, pressed their hands around their waist and followed Dussander and Paulina into the metal room. The metal room is relatively warm, and the ground is made up of a layer of thick black metal plates. It can be seen that the people living and working in this house usually take good care of the ground. Using rough black metal to make the floor without any rust marks is not an easy task. "You 2, wait here for a moment." Rosen pointed to the mud and water on his body, as well as the wound on his leg, and said, "I'll go treat it and then change into a clean clothes." He paused before explaining, "The machine tool is right behind the house, sir. You can go and take a look first. The old woman who put down the lever is brewing tea. The tin teapot injects brown tea into a pair of tea cups that have different patterns and shapes." She walked over to Dussander and Paulina with a slightly trembling hand holding a teacup. "Please have some tea, sir." "Miss." Dussander took the teacup handed by the old woman, smelled the pungent smell of peat in the cup, and then drank 2 sips of tea without changing his face or heart. "When my short-lived son was still alive, he valued that machine tool very much." The old woman put down her teacup and rubbed her hands repeatedly with some sadness. "Now, this has become his most valuable inheritance for us. Mr. Rosen is a bit too eager to sell this machine tool," Dussander said, placing the teacup on a coffee table made of scrap metal to the side. He said he is willing to use the starting price of other machine tools auctioned off by the bankruptcy court to sell this inheritance to me. The old woman showed a stronger expression of grief. She lowered her head and hesitated for a long time before saying, "Rosen is the only man in the family, these things. He just needs to make a decision." "I brought a senior technician for evaluation," Dussander pointed to Paulina, who was hesitating whether to have tea next to her, and said, "She will conduct a detailed inspection of this machine tool. As long as it can still be used normally, I will make a purchase request to Mr. Rosen for a price far higher than the starting price of the bankruptcy court." Dussander picked up the peat-flavored teacup and took another sip. "Mr. Rosen is a very responsible person, he just lost his composure, so some decisions are not very wise. Kind sir." The old woman seemed to have completely lost the courage to hold the crowbar before. She trembled and bowed to Dussander, then sat down on the stool. Lips wriggle, but there is no sound. The tin house was a bit dim, and Dussander sat here for a while before gradually adapting to the darkness around him. He was about to take a look at the machine tool from behind when Tom and Todd suddenly blocked him and pulled out a revolver from his waist, pointing towards the door without covering it. A few stones flew towards the door, but due to poor accuracy, they directly hit the rusty iron sheet outside the house. The iron sheet hit by the stone made a loud noise and shook countless smoke like rust dust. "Pay back!" A few young men shouted loudly outside the door, "If you don't pay back, sell your daughter to a miner's brothel." Dussander squinted his eyes slightly. End of this chapter.